Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the different starter Pokemon in Pokemon speedruns. And specifically, I'm going to be making a tier list of every single starter Pokemon and talk to you guys about why they're good in speedruns or why they're bad in speedruns, how they would rank against each other, and just, kind of have a fun little tier to see how good are the different starters actually for a speedrunning purpose. For the sake of this video, I'm only going to be talking about the main series Pokemon games. So I will not be talking about Let's Go Eevee or Pikachu, I will not be talking about Colosseum or XD Gale of Darkness, and we're just going to talk about the main titles in Pokemon games. Anyway, with all that being said, let's get into it. So, as you can see, we've divided our tiers from S to F, just our standard tier list, and we're going to be starting our list off with Chimchar. Chimchar is the main Pokemon used in Gen 4 speedruns, and in Diamond and Pearl specifically, we can actually manipulate Chimchar to have the hidden power for grass, which makes it very, very good to deal with some of the early encounters, as well as some of the, like the first gym, the Rock-type gym, as well as many of the water Pokemon across the game. We can manipulate the Lucky Egg to make sure that it gets more than enough experience, and it just holds out really, really well. It's very doable, and a lot of the current best times in Diamond Pearl and even in Platinum actually use Chimchar throughout the entire game. And even though older routes had it being swapped out for Palkia later on, and older routes in Platinum used mainly Piplup, Chimchar still holds out as one of the best Pokemons in the game. So that's why we're ranking that one first. Next up on our list, we have Sobble. Sobble is the main Pokemon we use in Pokemon Sword. It is the definition of a glass cannon, and in speedrunning, that's kind of what you want. Glass cannon Pokemon usually do very, very well. So, right up there with Chimchar, fantastic Pokemon to breeze through the game with, and honestly, even in Shield, it's doable as a starter. It's not as good there because the gyms just don't work out quite as well, but it's still a very powerful starter to work with. Next up on our list, still in S tier, is Popplio. Popplio is the main Pokemon used in Pokemon Moon speedruns, and it's mainly there as a result of its good move pool, good coverage. You get Waterium Z very, very early on in the game, which makes it very helpful to work with. In Pokemon Moon speedruns, you get the starter fairly late, but Popplio is very, very commonly runnable. Most Popplios will work one way or another. Just the combination of the items you get, the good stats that it has, just makes it a good all-round Pokemon. So the next one I actually debated whether I would put in S tier or in A tier, but we're still in S tier here. I've got two more Pokemon in S tier. Next up we have Totodile. Now, Totodile actually doesn't do that well in Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver, but it absolutely breezes through Gold, Silver, Crystal. The current routes actually have manipulations and allow for usage of Pokemon like Raikou and the likes, but before that, Totodile was just used to breeze through the entire game, and it would do that very well. You'd hardly need to beat any extra trainers, you could just go through the game. There were barely any really dangerous fights, especially after you got past, like, Whitney. From there on, all the way to Red was fairly easy, and then Red was kind of a struggle. But Totodile is just a good, versatile Pokemon, very strong, very powerful, very good to work with, so yeah, definitely ranks in S. And then to close off our S tier, we have Mudkip. Now, Mudkip is used in both Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, as well as Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, just because it's a strong Pokemon. It does really well, it's got good coverage moves. The thing that makes it low S tier for me is that it just doesn't deal as well with some of the things in the late game, and even early on there are a few more roadblocks than you have with the other Pokemon that I've mentioned so far. Mudkip is still very strong, and with the legendaries you get later on, it makes it a fantastic Pokemon to just end up with. So Mudkip definitely worth the place in S tier. And with that, we're going to be moving on to A tier. Now, you may have noticed there is still a few gens missing, and there is good reason for that, but before adding them, I'm going to add one more Pokemon in A tier that's actually already showed up before. I'm talking Piplup. Piplup just barely makes it, doesn't make it into S tier for me, and there is a single fight that's the reason for that for me. In Diamond Pearl Platinum speedruns, which is the main main game where you would use Piplup, specifically in Platinum where it's been used a lot, the Grass Gym Leader is the second gym leader, and Piplup does not deal well with it. You can win, but if you do not have a Manip Piplup, your odds are near 0. If you have a Manip Piplup, it's still low unless you also manage to Manip Pokéras, and it just makes the start very brutal because the things you need for it to get through that gym comfortably are super specific, and that's kind of why I decided to end up putting this in A tier. So the next one is kind of in a similar boat, but also not really. Next up in A tier, we have our first Gen 5 Pokemon. I'm talking Tepek. Tepek actually almost made S tier for me as well. And Tepek is still used a lot in Black and White speedruns. It's not really used in Black and White 2. There's just better options there in Drillbur. And in Black and White, it used to be the main until we learned that Lillipup actually does a little bit better. Tepek still is a very consistent Pokemon to get through the game, and it's definitely high up there. It's a solid starter. It's, if you do the Manips, very consistent to get throughout the entire game with it, no questions asked. The only thing keeping it out of S tier is the requirement for Manip, because without it, it's honestly kind of a nightmare. Or, well, that's maybe exaggerating it, but Tepek doesn't do that well if its IVs and nature aren't great. So stat-wise, it's a bit more specific. You don't have that much leeway like you do with, for example, Popplio or Totodile. And there are better options in that game, which doesn't help its case. So Tepek in A tier. Now, last in A tier, and this one I actually knew was going to be an A tier from the start for me, is Squirtle. Squirtle in Red, Blue, and Yellow is kind of or Red and Blue really, is kind of in the same boat as Tepek, as there is just a better Pokemon, a more consistent Pokemon. Fire Red and Leaf Green, Squirtle actually does really well, and it can get you through the game no problem, but Squirtle so heavily, especially early on, relies on not 100% accurate moves. Mega Punch is kind of a thing you need to deal with a lot with Squirtle, and if you miss it, it can really screw you over. And even later on in the game, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, where we do still use Squirtle, there are still a lot of fights where things can get very tricky. And that's kind of the main reason for me for putting it into A tier rather than S tier. It's just not as consistent, and there are often better options. Last to enter A tier for me, and this one's going to be a little bit of a controversial one because this is the first Pokemon that's not used in any Pokemon speedruns at all, but I wanted to add it in anyway, is Snivy. Now, Snivy is actually a bit slower than Tepek, and for speedrunning it doesn't hold out that well. It's quite frail early on, but Snivy is an absolute beast once you get to the late game. And that's honestly why it's still an A tier Pokemon for me. It's, in terms of like time, it's only about like 10 minutes slower than Tepek. It's really not that bad. And once Snivy gets Coil, it is absolutely unstoppable. The thing is really frail early on, and you kind of mitigate that later on when you get the Eviolite. And up until that point, honestly, Snivy isn't the best. But from there on, it just breezes through everything. And I kind of still wanted to add Snivy in A tier just because of that. A good Snivy can still make for a very, very fast Pokemon to run through the game with. So yeah, very consistent, especially in the second half. First half, very finicky, and that's why it's definitely low A tier for me. This was like low A, high B. That's kind of where I was at with Snivy. And that does bring me to B tier. Now, to start off B tier, we have Charmander. Now, Charmander I'm putting here for one reason and one reason only. Charmander in Fire Red and Leaf Green is almost, not quite, but almost as good as Squirtle. It runs through the game at about the same rate. It's, like, time-wise, it's really about the same. It's just even more inconsistent than Squirtle, and that's the only thing keeping it out of A tier. In Fire Red Leaf Green, it can learn Metal Claw, so the first gym isn't really a problem. You kind of just skip the second gym for a little bit so that you're a little over leveled by the time you get there, and then from there you can kind of breeze through the game. Charmander is incredibly useful in Fire Red Leaf Green. It's completely useless by comparison in Red, Blue, Yellow, or Red and Blue, because in Red and Blue, you know, you just don't really get past the first gym all that easily with it, but in Fire Red Leaf Green, fantastic Pokemon, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Moving on, another Pokemon often used in Pokemon speedruns is Cyndaquil. Cyndaquil is the main we go for Heart Gold, Soul Silver. It's possible to beat the game with it in quite a reasonable time. It is not actually that bad in Gold Silver either. The only problem it struggles with there is that the first gym's kind of an issue. Cyndaquil, very good Pokemon, all around decent stats. Typhlosion holds out very well. It's used in Heart Gold, Soul Silver because Sprout Tower there is required, so it deals much better than the other Pokemon, but then it kind of gets swapped out later on, and what basically every route, Manips and Manipulus, just swaps out the Cyndaquil later, because late game it just doesn't do that well. Like, it's good early on, it's very decent, very usable, but it doesn't hold out that well throughout the game. The Gold Silver Crystal run, it is possible to run with Cyndaquil. It's about 15 minutes slower, but there's a lot of extra little things you need to do for it to keep up, which is why I would argue it's good, but not quite as good as any of the starters mentioned before. Last Pokemon for B tier, we have Oshawott. Oshawott is kind of in the same boat as Snivy, except it's also not as good as Snivy. It still holds out well, it can learn some good moves, you can get through the game with it fairly consistently. It's a little bit slower than Tepek and Snivy, but it holds out alright in Black and White, so that's why I'm adding it to the end of B tier. Moving on to C tier. C tier, we're going to be starting off with Torchic. Torchic, it actually has a route where it's used. In the No Centers, No Marts on Emerald, we actually use specifically Torchic. Torchic can do very well in the Gen 3 runs. It's actually very runnable in a lot of them, but it really struggles with the early game, and it loses a lot of time there. In the Torchic route for Pokemon Emerald, what you do is you go to the first gym, but rather than do the gym, you then go to the route north of it and beat every single trainer there, because you need every last bit of experience so you can evolve to Combusken, get Double Kick, and from there on it does quite well. But yeah, it really struggles with the early game. It's kind of hard to get started, and in that particular category, you actually wanted to have Hidden Power Water specifically, so the Manip is also not an extra selling point here. So yeah, Torchic, not bad, but definitely not great. Next up in C tier, we have Scorbunny. Scorbunny I'm adding as it's the main Pokemon we start with Sword and Shield. We don't keep it. We actually only use it for about like half an hour and then you switch to Growlithe. It's workable to get through the game like that, but this is really where we enter the realm of, yeah, these Pokemon are doable, but you probably don't really want to. Scorbunny does well, and you can get through the game with it, but it has a lot of roadblocks to overcome if you do. So, yeah, not recommended to run with this. And then one last Pokemon that I want to add here, and that's going to be Litten. Now, I actually had to do a little bit of research on this one on how good Litten actually was, because Litten is not used in any runs. But there is actually a route for Pokemon Moon using Litten. The problem that Litten runs into is, in order to actually beat the game with it, you're going to need to try and get a Wishy-Washy and the EXP share to help it buff its level a little bit, because you're going to struggle otherwise. Litten does alright, and there is an existing route for it, but Popplio is just so much better that it's just blown away like that, and, you know, not recommended for use, but definitely possible. That gets me to D tier. Now we're getting into the bottom of the bottom, so, you know, as you may have noticed, so far we've only put in one Grass-type Pokemon, and that's just because Grass-type Pokemon don't do that well. If you want to take a guess on what the worst Pokemon is going to be, be sure to leave them in the comments. I'm curious to see what you guys think here. Anyway, in D tier, we're going to start off with Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur is slow. Bulbasaur doesn't get started until fairly late. It gets its first like proper grass type move at like level 13, so it's fairly long into the game. Not a great Pokemon, but it gets an honorable spot here because it is the main Pokemon used in the glitched categories of Gen 1. And that's really more so by technicality, but yeah, Bulbasaur does not hold out very well. Not a great Pokemon, would not recommend. Similar to Bulbasaur, in D tier here we have Grooky. Grooky doesn't really have the status of Sobble. Even Scorbunny at least gets some use. Grooky doesn't really. Now, Grooky could get through the game quite well. You could probably get a run going with Grooky, but that's more so because the game is a little bit more lenient rather than Grooky being good enough. The entire Grooky line isn't bad, it's just it doesn't hold out that well for most of the game. So yeah, putting it very low here, not a Pokemon I would recommend using. Last in D tier, and our first Gen 6 Pokemon, we have Froakie. Now, I'm putting Froakie here in Gen 6, and the reason all of the Gen 6 Pokemon are this low is mainly because X and Y are really difficult to run with any of the starters. Froakie in particular gets this mention because it holds out a little bit better than the others, and you can sort of find a way to get past the second gym. The problem that X and Y struggle with is the level curve. Especially early on, you're going to be super under-leveled, and none of the starters really deal with that very well. In the run, you pretty much only use the starter for like 3 fights, and then you switch to a Farfetch'd because that's just better. The traded experience, the getting Swords Dance, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, Froakie definitely low D tier, not one that you would want to use for speedruns. That gets us to F tier. Everything that remains here is F tier. And you may have noticed there's quite a lot of them, and I'll explain some of them why they're this bad. But we're going to start with Chespin. Chespin gets the highest spot in F tier for me, mainly because it is the Pokemon we use in Pokemon X and Y. Again, not a great Pokemon, not even going to talk about it that much. It's not used by anyone in any run, and to my knowledge, nobody or almost nobody has even attempted to route Chespin. It just doesn't do that well. Next up is Turtwig, and Turtwig I actually have a little bit of experience with, as you may remember from the Turtwig only video that we did a little while back. Turtwig is very slow. Its low speed actually makes it so that almost every Pokemon is going to get at least one hit off. It does have Curse, which means we can boost our attack and actually one-shot things, but we're never outspeeding anything, and that's generally just a massive problem that you're going to run into. On top of that, Turtwig, once fully evolved, has a 4x weakness to ice moves, and just about everything in Platinum has an ice move. So, don't use this. Turtwig's awful to use. It's possible to beat the games with it, but it's slow, it's not really frail, but it does die very easily, and just everything gets a hit off, so you're constantly healing. That's really annoying. Next up in F tier, we have Fennekin. And Fennekin gets this spot similar to Chespin and Froakie. It's just not possible to get through the game with it. It struggles a bit more than the other two, mainly because it just wouldn't have a chance against the second gym leader. Just not happening. Just, nah, don't use it. Not recommended. Honestly, a lot of these in F tier could probably be swapped around. Fennekin could be considered as one of the last, but the lack of experience with Fennekin is one of the things that kind of keeps it alive, sort of. Next up, we have, and I hate to admit this, but we have Chikorita, one of my favorite starters. Chikorita can do okay in Gold, Silver, Crystal. I've attempted Chikorita only in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. It took me about 45 minutes to get past Bugsy. It is not doable. It leads with Scyther. You need basically the only strategy that would work is lower its accuracy, hope for some misses, and yeah, no. Chikorita just gets completely bodied in the early game in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. That's kind of what I'm putting it at in the last spot. Okay, down to 2 Pokemon. Now, if you've counted it right, you'll know that Rowlet and Trico are the last 2 remaining Pokemon, and honestly, these 2 could be interchangeable. I'm gonna put Trico in first, because at least Trico can get through some of the game. Trico gets this low spot because it dies everywhere. It's too frail. It's fast, which it does have that, but it's just too frail. First gym you can kind of get through, but then after that it kind of just stops. You don't get powerful enough to really one-shot a lot of things. You're dealing with Steel-type Pokemon. Once you get to the 3rd gym, Trico does not do well against that. It gets very little coverage. Trico, as lovely as it is as a Pokemon, it just dies to everything you encounter. But there is one thing worse, and that's Rowlet. Now, the reason I'm putting Rowlet bottom of the barrel is simply there's actually somebody who has attempted to route Rowlet in Pokemon Moon. Let's just say, they couldn't get past the trainer school. It is so bad that without actually grinding out a lot of other stuff, you're not even going to get past the trainer school, let alone beat the entire game. So yeah, that's our list. So yeah, hope you guys found that list interesting. I hope most of the stuff wasn't too surprising. A lot of these Pokemon kind of boil down to, are they used in speedruns, yes or no? And then from there, why not? And is it because there's just something that's better, or are they just not holding up well at all? If you did find it interesting, do be sure to leave a like. If there were any surprises in the list, or any comments you have on Pokemon you would place differently, now do note this was solely from a speedrunner's perspective. Be sure to leave them in the comments. And with that being said, that's where we're going to end it up for today. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys next time.